Good to see you. My name is Kelly Greenlee. I am the Community Outreach Librarian here at PML, and very happy to have you here tonight. I didn't quite know what the turnout would be for a Thursday evening, so this is great. I'm glad to see you all. And such a warm night. It's nice and cool in here, I think. Hopefully not too cool. So before we start, I just want to let you know, many of you have been here before, but this is the third installment in our Lawns Gone Wild series, which is going to be a year-long, maybe more. I don't know. We'll surprise you. It's a series, we'll say, that we're calling Lawns Gone Wild, and we are partnering with Chebeague and Cumberland Land Trust, and with the Sustainability Committee, which is part of the Lands and Conservation Committee through the town of Cumberland. So we're very happy to partner with them. And it's thanks to grant money that the Sustainability Committee received that we are all here this evening and we are enjoying this series. So we can thank them. I'm going to introduce Jesse Lamar Vincent in just a second. But before I do that, I want to tell you the couple of events that we have coming up for Lawns Gone Wild. On June 10th, we're saving the bobolink and other grassland birds. So it's a grassland management topic, and that's going to be at Twinbrook. And our speaker is going to be Maeve McGowan of Chebeague Estuary Land Trust and Sally Stockwell from Maine Audubon. So that'll be really interesting. We're going to meet at Twinbrook at the Red Shelter at 10 a.m. on June 10th. And on July 8th, we have a Sustainable Practices in Action, we're calling it, and it's a road tour. So we're going to meet at Wild Seed Project, which is in North Yarmouth. So everyone's going to meet there. We're going to see what Wild Seed is doing in their particular yard, and then we're going to visit 2 other yards that are right nearby. So that'll be kind of interesting. We get a chance to talk to the people, property owners and the gardeners and all that stuff. So it should be really interesting. So, Jesse.
Hi. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks everybody for being here. So yeah, the Sustainability Committee got a grant from the state of Maine, a community sustainability and resilience grant. And so as part of that, we wanted to do some education around sustainable landscaping. So this series is part of that. And next year, on Monday, the town council approved the use of the land around the salt shed at the end of Stiles Way to plant a community orchard. So hopefully next year we'll have some more hands-on Lawns Gone Wild stuff where we'll be planting trees and flowers and meadows and bushes and berries and all the things. So we'll be getting our hands dirty starting next year, getting the community orchard going. But for this year, got Aaron doing his third of 3 talks. Aaron Parker of Edgewood Nursery. Aaron has been landscaping and gardening for his whole life, but I think professionally for 20 plus years. He owns his own small nursery now where he focuses on medicinals and edibles and unique native plants. I highly recommend visiting him on Tuesday when he's open to check out all the amazing things he has. I've gotten a lot of plants from him. And I've also learned a lot and changed the entire way I garden based on the way Aaron gardens, just to try and be more sustainable and friendly to the bees and the bugs and everything. Yeah, he's a really inspiring guy, and so I hope you listen and take some lessons from what he's doing. Without further ado, take it away, Aaron.
Thank you, Jesse, for that very kind introduction. One quick note about the handout: if you have a smartphone, you might want the digital version. If you have the paper, you can potentially scan it from where you are, but it's all that QR code is also on a piece of paper where you got that paper handout. The reason you might want the digital one is there's a lot of really, really small text on there. So if you have trouble reading like 6-point font, it'll be easier on the digital one. There's a couple of links in that tiny font that aren't like human readable on the paper, but you can click on them in the digital thing. So just a little bit of background I started doing landscaping, working for my neighbor when I was 14, and I made a living doing landscaping for almost 20 years. And when I started working on my own, I focused on edible landscape and kitchen gardens, which when I started was basically not a thing. Nobody really wanted that, so it was like maybe 10% of what I did. And by the time I decided to quit landscaping in favor of running a nursery, it was about 90% of what I did, and I was turning away work all the time. So it's an idea, I think, that has really gotten very popular in the past 10 to 15 years. And I think it really is an idea whose time has come. And we inherently put work and material into the landscape that we live in, the land around our houses and where we live. So I think there's a lot to be said for if you're going to put that effort in, if you're going to put that material input in, it'd be nice to get back something, and that can be aesthetic, that can be habitat qualities, but it can also be food. And having food just growing around you is a pretty nice thing to have. So we'll get right into that. So the first thing I want to talk about is what might already be in your landscape that is edible. And just kind of got some prime examples in the next few slides, but just kind of getting out into your landscape and exploring what's already there can be very helpful. And there's a great resource called Plants for a Future, which may or may not be in the handout, but it's easy to find on Google. And that will give you just some very basic information about the edibility of various plants. So if you come across something in your landscape, you're like, well, this is a common garden plant, but does it have some edible use? There are a shocking amount of common garden plants that are edible or even delicious that people don't realize are edible. So first example, dandelion. Lots of people are familiar with dandelion greens. It turns out the whole plant is edible, and I think the greens are the least exciting part. I'm a big fan of dandelion flowers, and every day for the past week or so, I've been eating about this much a day. I like them just straight off the plant into my mouth. But if you don't like that, there's lots of different ways to prepare them. Dandelion fritters, dip them in batter and fry them. And what isn't delicious, dip them in batter and fry. But they also make a really nice tea. Like you can make a tea and add a little sweetener, and it kind of has a honey flavor. It's really nice. Dandelion wine. I get a lot of inspiration from my friend Stephen Barstow. His book Around the World in 80 Plants is mentioned at the end of the handout. And he really likes what he calls dandy noodles, which are the flower stems of the dandelion, lightly boiled and treated like pasta. Another really nice dandelion product is the roots. You can dig those up in the early spring or the fall, roast them, and they make a really lovely sort of rich roasted tea. So dandelions, they're everywhere, and we might as well be eating them. Hosta, perhaps the most ubiquitous and boring landscape plants on Earth, but also a delicious perennial vegetable. In Asia, where hosta comes from, you can actually buy these in the grocery store. And here in North America, we have thousands of varieties of hosta, also selected for pretty leaves. and no one knows that they're edible. And this talk is pretty well timed because now is basically prime time to eat pasta. By the time it looks like this, it is edible but not good. But right now, as they're just unfurling or even unfurled shoots, kind of like asparagus, they're quite delicious. They're edible raw, but I think they're best treated like asparagus, like lightly sauteed, little butter and garlic, and they are magnificent. So if you've got pasta in your garden, I highly recommend giving it a try. And they can actually withstand a pretty heavy harvest and bounce right back. And a few weeks later, you wouldn't know that you cut off a bunch of the plant. If you've got deer pressure, you probably know that pasta can get nibbled severely and bounce right back. So you can also be the one nibbling the pasta. Coosa dogwood, known as Coosa. It's a pretty common landscape tree. If you don't recognize it from this funky looking fruit, you might recognize these flowers. And again, we've got a plant here that has an edible characteristic that no one really cares about in North America. So these are all selected for pretty flowers. And so the fruit quality is really variable. Some of them don't taste like anything. But the best one I ever had tasted like a perfectly ripe mango. Ooh. Really, really amazing flavor. The texture is kind of weird. The outer skin is not a great texture, and then has a soft, pulpy inside with pretty big seeds. So it's not, it's not a fruit that has been heavily selected for fruit quality. But it's certainly interesting and delicious to eat. And I imagine there's some way to prepare it that makes it, really shine. Red clover is another plant that is, the whole plant is edible. Some people, especially small children, like to pluck out the individual florets and suck the nectar out of it. I think the leaves are like okay, but I do like the flowers in a salad or something like that. It has kind of a rich vegetable taste, and they're pretty high in protein, which is unusual for a vegetable. This is one of my favorites, common milkweed. Not so long ago, this was a much maligned pasture weed that people were always like trying to get rid of. And now a lot of people are coming around to appreciating milkweed because it's the host plant for monarch butterfly larvae. And if that was the only reason to grow it, I think that would be a perfectly reasonable thing to like. It's worth growing just for that. But as a bonus, those flowers smell amazing, and there are several aspects of this plant that are edible, and not just edible, but really delicious. So the spring shoots, which are just coming up now, are really like a very tender, flavorful asparagus. Then later in the season, the flower buds, the flowers, the young pods are all edible. They should all be cooked, but you don't need to cook them to death. There was some bad information that went around in the 70s that to eat milkweed, you had to boil it in 2 changes of water and like really cook the hell out of it. It's totally wrong. You just need to, basically, if it's hot all the way through, that's enough cooking. But you can get a pretty unpleasant stomachache if you were to eat it raw, or if you ate like mature leaves or something like that. So do read up on how to eat milkweed before eating it. And like any new food, the first time you eat it, it should be just a little bit because it doesn't agree with everything. All violets are edible. There's many species. We've got about 15 to 20 native species of violets here in Maine. There's a few non-native ones too, like this Johnny Jump Up. I don't think any of them have like a high flavor. They're just salad filler, I would call them. But they also make things look really pretty. Like a salad with some violets in it looks very appealing, or violets on, you know, a cake or cupcakes or whatever. So while they may not have a lot of flavor, they look great, and that's nice. They also have a lot of nutrition, and there's a lot of unusual phytochemicals in there that are, you know, supportive of good health. And as Americans, most of us are getting plenty of you know, carbohydrates, proteins, fats. You know, most people are getting plenty of those. What we're not getting a lot of is fiber and phytonutrients. And a lot of the plants that I'll be talking about today are particularly rich in those. So even though a lot of these plants aren't going to be providing like calories and protein, they do fill in an important nutritional gap in the, you know, Western diet that most of us eat. Flowering cherry, also crab apples. These ornamental trees might already be edible. Most of them aren't particularly palatable, but a lot of them do make good sauces, syrups, cider, stuff like that. And most of these ornamental trees in the genus Prunus or Malus, so that would be flowering cherries and crab apples, make excellent rootstocks for more edible varieties. So if you've got, you know, a crab apple tree and would prefer to have like a dessert apple tree, you can actually cut off limbs and regraft that tree and have a similarly sized tree of a different variety in 2 to 3 years. And it's shockingly easy to do that. And the same thing is true of flowering cherries. Another seriously underappreciated tree for food is the oak. Oaks not only provide food for humans, but are sort of a cornerstone of our local ecosystems, hosting several hundred different varieties of insect, and by extension, many, many species of birds, because the birds, the caterpillars that eat the oak. Acorns in the history of humans have nourished more humans than brains have. They do require processing in order to make them edible. If you've ever eaten a raw acorn, they are bitter as all get out. But that bitterness comes from tannins that are relatively easy to leach out. And at first, when I first started processing acorns, it's like, wow, it's a lot of work to get, you know, a pretty small amount of acorn flour. And then I tried growing grains. And suddenly the acorns seemed like a really good deal. So compared to preparing a bed, planting grains, harvesting, threshing, winnowing, just collecting, processing acorns turns out to be pretty easy. Even Japanese knotweed is edible. This is one that I would beg you, please do not plant or move ever. This plant's a real problem. But if you got it, you might as well experiment with eating it. And again, now's a great time to try that because the tender young shoots are the edible portion of this plant. I've never had anything native Japanese knotweed that I would say was particularly good, but I have talked to several people who claim they have. So if you come up with a recipe that really shines,
It's because they want you to come over and take theirs.
Oh, no, it's great. You can have a whole bushel. All right. So the next section, I want to talk about different styles of landscaping. And the short version of this section is an edible landscape can look like whatever you want it to. I think of landscape styles being on a sort of continuum from naturalized landscape to a formal landscape. And you can pick your sweet spot anywhere on there. On the naturalized side, your benefits are generally higher productivity, more ecological benefits, less work, and less off-site material inputs. The downside is it doesn't look like conventionally attractive. I personally like the way my garden looks, but my partner is sometimes skeptical. She will call it things like a jungle, or a mess, or why isn't there a path there anymore? All valid concerns. But I'm going to start off with some pictures of my garden that I took today. And this is very much a working landscape. I make about 95% of my income by growing plant material on this site and selling it. So there's a lot of space, like in here, that these are beds where seeds planted, there's nursery stock. So it's not, purely for aesthetic, but I think it looks pretty nice. There's, plums blooming here. You'll see more stuff in bloom. So this is an American plum. There's lots of dandelions in there. That purple is a biennial called Lunaria annua, which has edible flowers, edible seed pods, really highly ornamental seed pods that you would find in red flower arrangements. Here's kind of the same area later in the season. Another view in sort of like August. Not sure when this one's from, but this is an apple tree. There's violets on the ground. These are walking onions. So this is a very, naturalized landscape. There's very little room for weeds. Everything is heavily mulched with tree leaves. And it requires, a fair amount of input of labor just to kind of keep everything in balance. But very likely the largest labor input is just harvesting. So, spend a significant amount of time just going out and cutting those onions to use them in dinner or whatever.
Yes.
So in the area near my house, I would say I have a low deer pressure, and the further you get away from the house, the more deer pressure there is. We have, several humans living here, spend a lot of time outside, plus 2 dogs.
Right.
So that really helps. And then in the peripheral areas, I mostly utilize small fences around new plantings. So just like a 4 to 6 foot circle of 5 foot high belted wire staked down, and that pretty much takes care of it. And once the tree is up above that, it's pretty good. But that's a good question. Here's another view of my place. This whole border is all aggressive perennial vegetables with stuff that doesn't spread by the roots. And the purpose of that border is to keep the quack grass that's here in the mown area, that I cannot reliably get rid of out of these annually cultivated beds where there's like tomatoes and stuff growing. And after years of battling quack grass, I dug this trench and filled it with these densely rooted perennials, and it has been extremely effective. Here are some edible landscape ideas that incorporate annual veggies. I'm a big fan of perennials for various reasons. Mostly they're a lot less work than annuals, and they can be established in many different arrangements to create a landscape of whatever style we want that kind of stays a little more static than annual vegetables. But I think incorporating annuals to some areas is really nice, whether that be just like a vegetable garden in a raised bed or something like this where you've got beans growing on a decorative trellis and an edge with a whole bunch of squash in it. There's another view of kind of the edge of the lawn covered in squash with dahlias and fennel kind of coming up through the squash. Here's a little perennial kitchen herb bed that I designed for someone. And the next section are all from this other landscaper who lives in Falmouth, Ben Steele, who landscapes. And he does a lot more sort of formal landscape. He does utilize a fair amount of edible stuff. And I just use these pictures that he gave me as an example of, oh, you can have a really conventionally attractive landscape full of flowers and design elements that is also edible. It's a really nicely laid out annual vegetable garden. This hillside has garlic, potatoes, pasta, and several perennials that are edible. And it's got a bunch of fancy stonework, and it looks real sharp. Another view of a fancy looking vegetable garden. All right. Now my favorite part, where I get to tell you about all the cool plants that you should plant. On the handout, there's a couple symbols next to the common names of the plants. There's a star, and the star indicates plants that might need special care. If you want the lowest maintenance landscape, don't plant any of those. They're all plants I think are worth growing, but they might need a little help once in a while, and I'll tell you about that. Also, before I move on to the next section, are there any questions about anything I've covered so far?
Could you just quickly rattle off what are some of the deep-rooted perennials for the edge to keep out the quackgrass?
Yes. The most effective deep-rooted perennial to keep out grass that I have found is Botany 14 comfrey. And I like that one specifically because it does not spread. If you plant Botany 14 comfrey and only Botany 14 comfrey, you should have a plant that will not set any viable seed at all ever and will stay put unless you dig it out. Some other ones are Turkish Rocket that I'll definitely talk about, and Good King Henry, which I'll also talk about. All right, peaches. A warning about growing your own peaches. Once you have had a tree ripened peach that's like warm from the August sun, you will never be satisfied with whatever they're selling at Hannaford. They are phenomenal. And peaches, they have some great properties. They bear really young. A 3-year-old peach tree will often start producing. They bear heavily. As you can see, this tree is like propped up. If it wasn't propped up, that branch would have broken off under the weight of that fruit. What you're supposed to do is thin the fruit so it's more balanced and like the branch can hold it all. I often don't thin enough because they can't resist the draw of a ton of peaches. This tree, we got as much as 150 pounds of fruit from a single tree. And peaches are self-fertile, so you don't need multiple trees. So if you have limited space, just one peach tree is fine. So that's the good stuff about peaches. Negative things about peaches, they vary young. They also die young. 10 to 15 years is a pretty good run for a peach tree in Maine. So when your peach tree is getting old, maybe plant another one before the first one actually dies, so that by the time that tree dies, you got another one start to produce. Now, the really bummer thing is a disease called ground rot. Any fruit in the genus Prunus, which is stone fruit, peaches, plums, cherries, apricots, are all susceptible to this really annoying fungal disease called ground rot. And once it shows up, it tends to not go away. And in Maine, it usually does show up eventually. And there's various things that you can spray to protect from ground rot without getting into the area of like toxic, nasty things. This year, I'm going to be experimenting with spraying my stone fruits with a combination of whey and a bacteria called Bacillus subtilis. I might also experiment with a combination of kaolin, clay, and sulfur. But basically, if you want a low to no maintenance fruit tree, peaches might be that thing for a few years, but eventually you'll probably have to deal with ground rot and either get rid of the tree or start spraying something.
The spraying that you're doing now, is that to try to keep it away, or you already have it?
It's already in my orchard. It's like around, and especially the whey and Bacillus subtilis spray would be something that I would spray before it shows up in hopes of preventing it from happening. And the idea behind that particular spray is something called competitive colonization, where you're spraying bacteria and fungi that are good onto the surface of the plant in hopes of getting a good population of good guys that will cover that surface and prevent the spores of ground rot from catching hold when they inevitably land on the fruit. So it's similar to taking probiotics, but for a tree. So all around, peaches, very delicious, very exciting. If it wasn't for ground rot, I would say everyone should have them. And
Birds.
what's that?
Birds.
I haven't had any issues with birds. Squirrels are more of a problem because I have a dog or multiple dogs around. I don't really have much of a problem with squirrels, but in suburban landscapes, squirrels can be more of a problem. And it's funny, they don't even care about the fruit. They're only after the pit. Because if you've ever cracked open a peach pit and looked on the inside, the kernel is basically an almond. In fact, 1% roughly of peach seedlings have what's called a sweet kernel, meaning there's a low enough amount of cyanide in that kernel that you can actually eat it and it tastes like a delicious food. Moving on, American persimmon. This is a near native fruit tree the native range ends in like New York-ish, but with climate change, we can now grow these here in Maine. Beautiful, trouble-free hardwood tree that makes masses of these little fruit, which the American ones, they're maybe, you know, the size of a quarter to twice that size. And they ripen really, really, really late, like November. And they'll hold on the tree even after the tree drops its leaves, which looks really cool. You get this tree, it kind of looks like a Christmas tree because it's covered in all this bright fruit. And they're very sweet and very squishy. So it's kind of like the flavor of an apricot dipped in honey. Very, very pleasant. What is very unpleasant is an underripe. The underripe persimmon is quite an experience. It is so astringent, it will chemically dry up all of your saliva. So you gotta wait till they're actually ripe before you eat them. But other than that, really nice tree, very low maintenance. The only thing is you gotta get a grafted, early ripening variety. They tend to be pretty much hardy in our climate, although it's a little bit borderline, but only early ripening varieties will ripen here. Mulberry, totally underutilized fruit here in Maine. They're all over the Southeast and the Midwest, and they're pretty rare up here, despite being very easy to grow. I've grown many varieties, and nothing can quite compete with Illinois everbearing. Fruit size is, I would say, moderate. They're not huge, but the flavor is absolutely stunning. You can think of it as like a seedless blackberry that grows on a tree. And when you see everbearing in that name, for me, that everbearing period starts in late June and ends in October. So really, really long season. And for about half that season, on a moderately sized tree, we're getting like a double handful of fruit every day. So highly nutritious fruit, and just like a constant supply. It's not hard to like save some up if you want to make a pie or something. But mostly we're just like picking up the trees straight in the mouth. Really, really wonderful tree. Also, the leaves of mulberries, they're not particularly palatable for humans, but they're extremely nutritious and make a great animal fodder. They can be up to 20% protein, which is like the equivalent of like a grain ration for animals. And the reason that they have such high protein is about 10,000 years of human selection, because mulberry leaves are the food for silkworms, and silk is a protein-based fiber. So if you want high quality, abundant silk fiber, you need high quality, high protein leaves to feed these silkworms. Downsides of mulberry, not a whole lot. They're very easy to grow in, particularly cold microclimate. You might get some tip dieback because the leaves are so palatable to animals. They might need some extra protection from deer if you've got deer pressure. And then there's the staining. These dark fruited mulberries are extremely staining. That stain your hands, your face, your clothes, concrete driveways, car paint. So basically you want to site it somewhere where it's not going to matter if some fruit falls on the ground. Great question. People frequently come to my nursery and want to buy a mulberry bush. It's
That's
not a thing.
nice.
This variety, Illinois everbearing, tops out around 25 feet. And they do well with heavy pruning, so you can kind of keep them whatever size you want. But I have some vigorous ones that will grow 15 feet in a year after a heavy pruning. So it's a tree, definitely a tree. There is also a variety called Geraldine dwarf that tops out around 6-ish feet if you're, want to put a mulberry in a more compact spot or not have to prune it. Yeah. There's also some light fruited varieties like sweet lavender that have a white or light purple fruit that is non-staining. If the staining fruit is for some reason something I really worry about. American plum, a really interesting small tree, beautiful flowers in the spring, really tasty fruit, although it's pretty variable. This is a grafted variety called Dalton's American that has very tasty fruit. The flavor develops kind of in the last 3 or 4 days of ripening. So when they're not quite ripe, they're like okay, like a plum from the store. But then when they're truly ripe on the tree, they're delicious. American plum does suffer from brown rot like all prunus. And it has a characteristic that I would say is neutral of suckering off the roots quite a bit. That can be positive if you want like a thicket, which makes excellent wildlife habitat. It can also be positive because wherever that sucker comes up, you can graft on a new variety, and American plum will accept grafts from almost any prunus species. So any kind of plum, cherry, apricot, peach. I've even grafted sand cherry, which is like a prostrate shrub, and peach plums. I've grafted onto American plum. But those suckers can also be annoying, and it's a maintenance thing where 1 to 2 times a year you gotta go and have the unwanted suckers, which is not a big deal, but something to be aware of. Again, like if you're looking for a really low maintenance plant, probably not this one. Another positive aspect is they are native here in Maine, which kind of is a check in their favor as far as providing habitat for wildlife. Pawpaw, Asimina triloba, another like the persimmon. This is a near native with a range that ends in New York State, and maybe wouldn't have grown here, or like could barely grow here like 100 years ago, but with climate change, they grow awesome here now, and will probably just get better as our climate unfortunately continues to warm. So it's a member of the Annonaceae family. If you're familiar with tropical fruit, this one has a bunch of relatives: annona, custard apple, a bunch of other things I have never tasted. And fruit grows like this. Each one of those fruits can be up to a pound, about this big. And it tastes like a cross between a mango and a banana. They're absolutely delicious. And the inside is super soft and custardy, kind of like a totally ripe avocado. So I would eat this by cutting it in half, just like that, and just eating it with a spoon. It also is great in smoothies and sorbets, freezes really well. You just don't want to cook it or dry it because something happens to it when you cook it or dry it, and it'll give you a really bad stuff. So fresh, frozen, that's great. Dried or cooked, not so much.
Are we looking at the seeds here?
Yes, and these are the seeds. And they're big, they're like yay big. Easy to work around. And this is this is a fruit that has lost its original seed dispersal mechanism. Like the avocado or the Osage orange, this is a fruit that was at one time just the seeds were distributed by Paleolithic megafauna. So think woolly mammoth, giant brown sloth, something that's going to eat this fruit that's this big in a single bite. And the modern, what we know is the modern native range of the pawpaw is almost certainly based on where indigenous people carried it and planted it, because it was has been popular for around 10,000 years.
Have you tried freeze drying it? Or is that the same?
I have tried freeze drying it. I was real excited that perhaps it would not be terrible. And I took a very conservative 1 gram of freeze-dried pawpaw fruit, and it was absolutely delicious, maintained the flavor of the fresh pawpaw, and I got like moderately sick from 1 gram of that. And if you aren't familiar with metric measurements, a copper penny weighs 2.5 grams. So there's something about dried pawpaw that is not a good idea. Hazelnuts. Most hazelnuts, and the ones that are most commonly grown around here, are shrubs. They can range from a small shrub to the large shrub. There's also a Turkish tree hazel, that is a tree. But hazels make great hedges, privacy screens, stuff like that. They coppice really well, which is a pruning practice where you just cut the whole thing down to the ground. So if your hazel is, getting a bit old, getting a bit thin, not producing nuts anymore, you just cut the whole thing down and it grows right back. That's also how coppice wood is produced, which is the wood that results from that type of pruning, and can be very useful for various craft projects.
Japanese beetles. Wow.
Interesting, I haven't had
Oh,
that.
we had to move ours. It was like putting the Japanese beetle trap up, and it was like, it was amazing.
Huh,
It was just amazing.
that's very interesting. Yeah, so definitely something to consider. This is what the fruit looks like. I've seen, 2 or 3 is pretty common. On some that are really rocking, I've seen a bird that's like this with like 15 hazelnuts in it. Wow. But so hazels as a landscape shrub are generally quite low maintenance. Apparently Japanese beetles can be an issue. And hazels as a productive of food plant are a little bit more iffy, just because those nuts are really tasty and all the squirrels want to get them too. So if you plant them kind of along the edge of the woods where they would naturally like to grow, they'll probably grow very well, but you won't get any of them. So placing them out in the open with, mowed grass kind of around them, so the squirrels have to travel a risky path, that's going to help a lot. Also, if you have a dog who goes outside a lot, that's also helpful. If you shoot the squirrels and eat them first, that's probably the most effective.
Hawks. We had 3 hawks. We had seen squirrel years. There's no chipmunks now.
Amazing.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, hawks are wonderful. I have broadleaf hawks that nest like right on the edge of my yard. I've got a Cooper's hawk that's been hanging out.
They do back sections too.
They can be very effective pest control if you can convince them to show up. American chestnut or hybrid chestnuts. The American chestnut is unfortunately very susceptible to a chestnut blight that wiped them out in the 1800s, and we're just starting to see the release of some blight-resistant American chestnut genetics. So if you're a native plant stickler and really want that native species, it's starting to be available, but most of what's available is not blight-resistant and will unfortunately probably die young. Although young for a chestnut might be 50 or 60 years. So, something to consider. The blight-resistant hybrids grow pretty similarly and are probably the best bet for food production, if that's what you want. These are the edible portion of the tree. Chestnuts, a lot of people aren't really familiar with them, but there's a myriad of ways to cook them: roasted, boiled, etc. They can be made into flour. That's like a really rich, nutty flour. If you eat gluten-free, this is another nice replacement for gluten-based flours. Downside, it's a big tree. Like if you need a nice large shade tree, this one is fast growing, tolerates really weak soil. We have a lot of weak, acidy soil here in Maine. That's exactly what chestnuts love. But if you're working on suburban scale, you might not have them for a chestnut. A little time check. I got about half an hour. We're doing pretty good. High bush blueberry. I'm not going to say too much about that because you're probably familiar with blueberries. They love acid soil. So if you're going to be planting more than a few, a soil test is a pretty reasonable investment. It's like $25 from UMO. And if your soil is not acid enough for blueberries, the way to acidify it is with sulfur. There's no amount of coffee grounds, oak leaves, sawdust, none of those things can acidify soil. And the reason for that is all of those things will acidify it on a very short-term basis, but the acids in those are mostly tannins and they wash away and break down pretty rapidly. And all of those materials will push your soil pH towards neutral. As they break down, the acid washes away and what's left is stabilized soil carbon. And soil carbon always pushes pH towards neutral. But just a little sprinkle of sulfur can successfully acidify your soil for a few years. There's all sorts of cane fruits, rubus species that we can grow here in Maine. They're pretty much all easy. The exception is thornless blackberries, which aren't quite hardy enough often around here, although that's probably changing with climate change. My personal favorite is black raspberry. Really delicious, super high in antioxidants, and the easiest to manage, also a native species. And the reason that it's the easiest to manage is they don't sucker off the roots very much. Their habit is tip layering. So if you just let them grow, they'll grow, the cane kind of arches, and then it'll touch the ground. And when it touches the ground, it'll root in and cane will pop up. Versus red raspberries, which the roots grow everywhere, and then canes grow off the roots, and you suddenly have a dense thicket of red raspberries. If you either prune your black raspberries or trellis them so that tip of the cane never touches the ground, you will get minimal extra canes popping up everywhere. And then when you want more canes, you can just stick the tip of that cane on the ground and it will pop right up. You can even put it straight into a pot and grow a new plant directly into the pot. So nice, native, high quality fruit, and less of a management hassle.
Which are the ones that become a blood sport? We had some very nice raspberry canes recently. We've got, I think they're blacker, my goodness.
Yeah,
Blood sport.
I would say blackberries are the most vicious of the cane fruits. And they do tend to show up here and there because birds eat them and then plant them into the landscape.
And those are the cane.
Yeah, blackberries sucker off the roots quite abundantly. Goonie, this is a relative of the autumn olive, which is pretty invasive. I encourage people to harvest autumn olive, but I wouldn't encourage planting of it because they just go everywhere. Goonie, at least in the Northeast, does not appear to be invasive at all. I think mostly because they have very complex seed dormancy. Like it took me years to figure out how to get them to grow at all from seed, and our weather conditions just aren't conducive to the seeds germinating. So this is a nitrogen fixing shrub that produces a sweet and sour fruit in great abundance in the summer, and this the fruit is loaded with lycopene, which is the antioxidant found in tomatoes. But there's about 30 times as much lycopene per pound in gooey fruit than there is in tomato. And they're just really tasty. Elderberries are a nice native shrub. That's what the fruit looks like. Pretty soon you're going to see this in many a ditch near you. So if you don't have a spot for these in your landscape, you can probably find wild ones. They're not good out of hand. These are exclusively for cooking. They make a phenomenal syrup or jelly. They mixed in with other fruit and supposedly have some pretty potent antiviral properties. So it's a nice thing to have if you've got cold coming on or something like that. This is Tilia americana, the American basswood, another nice native shade tree. And the edible portion of this is actually the young leaves. So as the leaves are opening, kind of like casa, you have to get it, at its proper harvest window. They're quite delicious, and the leaves can be really large too. Other edible parts I don't have a picture of are the flowers and fruit. The flowers make a really nice floral tea, and the fruit, supposedly you can make a chocolatey beverage out of. I've yet to actually do it, but I've heard good things. This is a tree or large shrub from China called yellowthorn. A little bit more experimental as far as like how much you can actually harvest from it. They're absolutely beautiful. They have these clusters of white flowers that start off yellow and then turn red. And they get these really neat looking seed capsules with about a dozen small nuts inside. And the nuts are very high in fat and taste like macadamia nuts. And pretty quick to fruit. I've seen these flower in as little as 3 years from seed. This is one of my favorite fruit trees, the cornelian cherry, Cornus moss. Someone asked me earlier if there was any particular kind of forsythia that I would recommend. And I said, I would recommend not planting forsythia and instead planting this. Blooms about the same time as forsythia, has similar like bright yellow flower. The flowers last a bit longer than forsythia does. And then you get these. Really, really tasty, very abundant fruit. And people call them cherries, but they're really not. They're kind of their own thing. And they have a lot of advantages over cherries. The biggest one, they have basically no disease pressure. So really easy to grow. Also, cherries you have to generally pick individually, and they're small, so it's a lot of effort. These will shake out of the tree by just going like this when they're dead ripe, which is when you want them. So you can lay a tarp, shake the branch, they fall onto the tarp. You pick out a few twigs and leaves, and you're good. Good question. In the resource section, there is a link for North Branch Farm. I think that might be the only place around that might have cultivars. I have seedlings coming up, but they're not going to be ready probably till next year. I know Jesse Stevens of Size Trees, which is also in the resource section of the handout. He has nice large seedlings, like 4 to 5 feet tall, available this season. And this fruit is typical of a seedling. So planting seedlings is fine. But if you want really spectacular fruit like this, or even this, you want cultivars. So I think if you can find cultivar stock, that's what I would recommend. And if not, seedlings are totally worth growing. What's that? There is a pit. And on one that large, it's pretty substantial. Going back to why I like these more than regular cherries to grow. When they're dead ripe, they're very soft, and you can process them with a Foley food mill, one of those cranky things you use to make applesauce, which is much, much faster than individually pitting regular cherries. I love my regular cherry tree. We get about 30 pounds of cherries every year, and it's a lot of work to pick all those cherries, pit them, and do anything with them. Worth it, but it's a lot of work. Yes.
How big did that get in here? Spread.
So that's about as big as it's likely to get. That tree is probably about 25 by 25, but you can prune them to be much smaller than that, like kind of 10 by 10, or even 5 feet wide by 8 feet tall. I have a bunch planted that are about 10 years old, and I would say they're in the 5 feet wide, 8 feet tall range, and I'll probably let them get bigger than that. But with moderate pruning, I would say you can kind of pick the size that you want. You also, when you plant a new one, you have the option of letting it be a sort of multi-stem shrub form, which is the form that it will naturally tend to take, or training it into a tree form like this. Personal preference, the one advantage of training it into a single trunk tree that is really nice is, given 10 to 20 years, it will develop a really nice big trunk, and it has beautiful exfoliating bark. So as a landscape element, training to a tree form is nice, but as a big shrub, you still get the flowers and the nice leaves and all the fruit. Yeah, this was last year, and I was blown away by the size of this fruit. Yeah, they're like that. All right, on to some herbaceous perennials. This is seed kale. And if you're going to grow one perennial vegetable, sea kale is probably a good choice, likes full sun. The reason I like sea kale as sort of an introduction to perennial vegetables is a bunch of different times to harvest, and they all resemble something familiar. So the young leaves taste and have the texture of kale. The mature leaves are more like collard greens. The flower buds are very much like broccoli. The flowers are edible and have a strong honey scent, which is lovely. And then if you don't eat the flowers, they turn into seed pods that taste like snap peas. So really, an all-around amazing plant and very attractive. The roots are also edible, but that's going to substantially damage the plant, so I basically don't ever harvest them. This is one of my favorite perennial vegetables, Calypsia. It is a vining spinach relative, and it has the flavor similar to spinach, but the leaf texture is much lighter. So it's sort of, the leaf texture is closer to like a lettuce, but with a spinachy flavor, and obviously quite abundant. Way easier to grow than spinach with a much longer season. It'll also grow well in part shade. I actually recommend planting in part shade rather than in full sun. And you can either grow on a trellis like this, which makes harvest easier and limits the damage done by slugs, which if you have a lot of slugs, they like to eat this plant. But also will grow perfectly well as like a ground cover. And probably my most productive plant is a ground cover underneath a cherry tree. And I can harvest from like April to October. Highly productive perennial vegetable. And this time of year, I do this pretty much every day. Partial shade, yeah. In what I would call like full shade, it'll stay alive, but it won't be particularly productive. This is Turkish rocket. That exact picture. Turkish rocket's another perennial vegetable. The young leaves taste like mustard greens. The flower buds are by far the best part. They taste like broccoli raw with like a little bit of a seaweed flavor. And the downside of Turkish rocket is that it's too easy to grow. It will self-seed to an annoying degree if you let it. It's not a problem if you are careful about harvesting all the flower buds. So that's your primary harvest. You just stay on top of that, it's not going to move. But if it goes to seed and the seeds ripen, you'll wind up with a bunch of seedlings, which is not the worst, but you wouldn't want to do that for 5 years, say, and you have a big patch of it. Garden sorrel has a lovely lemony flavor. I particularly like the variety that I sell in my nursery, which never goes to flower, meaning that you have a super long season, probably like May to mid-October. You can regularly harvest from this plant. Dicstania tastes closer to celery than any perennial I've tasted. Plus, is very pretty and extremely attractive to pollinators. There's about 8 species of pollinator in that photo. You probably can't see it from the back, but there's several species of solitary wasps and syrphid flies, which are the 2 largest groups of beneficial insects that we have around here. So nice aesthetically, human edible components, and nice for pollinators. There's a whole bunch of different edible alliums that you can grow. This is my personal favorite, mouse garlic. If you want a native plant, there's a near native called Allium cerulum or nodding onion that's very similar. And I would say of plants that you might be familiar with, this is going to be closest to like garlic chives. But I like the flavor of this species better, and I like the showy purple flowers more than the garlic chive flowers, which are white.
How long? Fall.
I would say the flowers are like about 18 inches. 18 inches. This is lovage. It's a pretty common European herb or perennial vegetable. The biggest mistake that people make with lovage is this time of year, you have these beautiful spring shoots. You could easily harvest like a salad bowl full of it, bring it into the kitchen and put a whole bunch of lovage in something, and then whatever you put it in just tastes like lovage. It can be a pretty overwhelming flavor. So a little bit of lovage is really, really delicious in a soup or a stir fry. It's very savory. If you think of like a very intense celery flavor, that's kind of what's going on with lovage. But it's, you just don't want to overdo it. And then in summer, you get sort of light yellow flowers that are very attractive to pollinators. The native version, I've been calling it Atlantic lovage, might be called Scots lovage in the handout, which is a more common name. It's much smaller, and the flavor is less intense, more akin to parsley. And it has these pretty white flowers. Stinging nettle. So you might not think of wanting to plant a plant that's covered in tiny glass hypodermic needles full of acid. But they're absolutely delicious and extremely nutritious and easy to grow and produce really abundant food. So if you can get over the hump of like, oh, this plant's a little intense, I highly recommend tasting this stuff. Obviously, not good for a salad, but when it's dried or cooked, the stinging element of it is deactivated, and it's quite delicious. Just the other day, I made a quiche with nettles and sochan that I'll talk about in a second, and Haplitzia that I already talked about, and it was absolutely. Again, we've got a native that's very similar, wood nettle, tastes really similar, really beautiful foliage, more shade tolerant than regular stinging nettle. Also comes up significantly later. These are just coming up now, and stinging nettles like this fall. And nettle is best harvested pretty young when the stems are still tender. So by having both the stinging nettle and the wood nettle, you can have a longer nettle season if you're into that sort of thing. Yes.
Heard that it's a good nesting species for ladybugs, is that right?
I don't know. What I have noticed are the caterpillars of red admiral butterflies, which nettles and wood nettle are like the favorite host plant for those butterflies. And occasionally their population will boom and they'll eat the nettles to the ground. And then a few weeks later, they pupate and the nettles pop right back up. But it's been cool since we've had nettles established to have many more of those butterflies. Good King Henry, this is another spinach relative, looks a lot like spinach. Some people don't like this plant, and I would say it's not good raw. To me, it has a weird aftertaste when it's raw, but cooked, it's nearly indistinguishable from spinach. And again, much easier to grow. The flowers are also edible, and the seeds can be cooked like quinoa. 15 minutes left. but this can be close, but I think I can wrap it up. But this is wild bergamot, also called wild bee balm. And all of the Monarda species are edible. This is the native one around here, so I'd like to use that as my sort of go-to. And if you've never eaten Monarda, I highly recommend it. It has a flavor kind of similar to oregano or basil. So it's not something you would eat as like a green vegetable, but as a culinary herb. So cooking with it as an herb is great. The florets, these little purple bits, are absolutely delicious and have like a sweet, spicy flavor to them. It also makes a really nice infused vinegar. So if you want sort of a very basic balsamic vinegar flavor, infusing a bunch of Monarda in cooking vinegar is a really nice way to do that. And of course, highly attractive to lots of pollinators and hummingbirds. This is Sochan, or leaf coneflower, Rudbeckia laciniata. It's a really beautiful native wildflower. Gets quite tall, gets about 6 to 7 feet tall in my garden, and has really delicious edible leaves. This time of year, they're tender and mild. As the season goes on, they get a little bit tougher and a little bit of a stronger flavor. I think they're good through the whole season. But the leaves in like August, say, you might want to cook a little bit more. Whereas now they can go in a salad or just be very lightly cooked. Also a really nice habitat plant. They host several species of butterfly larvae, and overwintering and migratory birds really like to eat the seeds in the fall and over the winter. They also spread, not outrageously, but they're moderately aggressive. So make sure you put them in a spot where they're not going to take over a flower garden or something. But can be a really nice option if you're removing invasives. This can be a nice one to put back in that place to take up the space once you pull out that multiflora fruits or whatever.
Is it all of the Rudbeckias that are edible or just certain?
That's the only one that I know of. I don't know that the other ones are particularly toxic, but that's the only one that I'm aware of being having a history for vegetable. So I have to look into the others. These are the fruit of the hardy kiwi. There's a few different species that we can grow here in Maine. Actinidia arcuta is the most common and the most productive. Pretty low pest or disease pressure, but they do have one potential downside, which is they are rampant vines. They will, once established, easily grow 20 feet at a time. So if you're planting these, you are making a lifetime commitment to pruning. And if you can't keep up with pruning anymore, you have to either pass that commitment on to someone else or kill the plant. There are abandoned stands of this up in the mid-coast that were planted in the 1800s and are now like quarter-acre kiwi monocrops, which really scares some people. And this plant might be banned in the next 5 or 10 years because of that. I don't think it's ecologically invasive, and its potential to become ecologically invasive, I think, is quite low. But its potential to become a management hassle, pretty high. So if you want one that's a little bit less aggressive, there is the Arctic kiwi, Actinidia coromicta, less productive of fruit, but is highly ornamental. This plant is dioecious, meaning it has male and female vines, and the male vines of Actinidia coromicta commonly have either variegated or 3-color variegated foliage, so they're very beautiful. They also handle part shade better than actinic ever do them. So these plants require significant forethought and a long-term commitment to pruning, but can be quite stunning, and the fruit is phenomenal. It's like you took all the sugar and flavor of a fuzzy kiwi and boiled it down into something the size of a grape, but that's not fuzzy, so you can eat the whole thing, and it's just a stunning flavor. This is another highly flavored fruit that grows on a woody vine. This is Schizandra Eastern Prince. And these plants come from China and Eastern Russia. In China, they're called oasis, which means 5-flavored fruit. And they are sweet and sour, spicy. I've never tasted salty, but maybe it's in there somewhere. Really, really highly flavored fruit, very delicious, very beautiful, and easy to grow. Last year, I had a record harvest. I got 27 pounds from a single vine. And I rarely have the cultivar available. Like, I usually sell seedlings, which might have more variable characteristics. But I lucked into a bunch of propagation material. So this, at least for the next year, maybe 2, I'll have this cultivar available at my nursery. We are getting down to the end of our time for the evening. So I got one more slide, which is grapes. Grapes are a little bit more pest and disease prone than either kiwis or Schizandra. But Vitis labrusca and its hybrids, so like Concord type grapes, are pretty easy to grow around here. They can be extremely abundant. They're delicious. And if you have confined chickens and grapes pair extremely well. You can build a grape trellis that goes over where the chickens are confined, and chickens appreciate that shade. They will fertilize the grapes and they'll grow like gangbusters. And they will also really, really help with the primary problem of grapes, which is Japanese beetles. The Japanese beetles, they tend to have the grub stage of their life directly under the plants that the adults feed on. So they will lay their eggs underneath the grapevines and the chickens will dig them up and eat them. The chickens will also eat any fruit that falls on the ground, and that interrupts the life cycle of the diseases that can affect grapes. And even adult Japanese beetles, if you go out early in the morning and shake the vines a little bit, the adults fall on the ground and the chickens leave them. So they're pretty easy to grow. You can grow them basically anywhere. But if you have confined chickens, that's like gold star. They go together. That's my last slide. Thank you for joining me this evening. And I have to take 5 minutes worth of questions.
You haven't mentioned the all-star weed in my vegetable garden, personally.
Yes. Purslane is a lovely edible. I wouldn't necessarily plant it because it tends to be dispersive. But if you've got it, or if you like it so much that you want to plant it, it's a great edible.
I just feed tons of it, or very good amounts of it every year. I just recently understood, and I tried cooking it. Chickens do.
Absolutely, yeah. If you can find a good use for your weeds, then you won't have any weeds. Any other questions?
Flowers on the, back at the red berries, yes. Is it flower?
Yes.
Are they entertaining, or are they just kind of like green flowers?
They're kind of cool. One of the common names for this is magnolia vine because the flowers look like little magnolia flowers. I would say they're insignificant because they're pretty small. They're neat, but not a big showy flower. All right.
Well,
Thanks for coming.
only a gardener would ask if the flower is entertaining at all.
They tell great jokes.
Thank you, Aaron. This is the third time that Aaron has been with us, sharing his knowledge, so we appreciate it very much. If you missed the previous two, we do have the recordings up on our website, so you can check those out. They're very informative as well. And tell us where your nursery is.
My nursery is located at 4 Cruston Way in Falmouth. It's right off the Blackstrap Road and a 10-minute drive from here, so pretty easy. I'm open Tuesdays 9 to 5 or by appointment. I am there almost all the time, so it's easy to make appointments. And I haven't started them yet this season, but I usually have garden tours on the last Saturday of the month at 10:30 in the morning. More information on that on my website, edgewoodnurseries.com.
Thank you.